Well, thanks for coming. This is, how low can you go? And we're going to cover a broad range of experiences that all the artists have. So what I'm going to do there's going to be images that'll be running behind us. And they're going to go continuously through the entire time. So some of the images do have text on them, so feel free to read along, take photos, but they are going to be going through as we start out. But I wanted to begin just about talking about what the panel will be in general, then speak about each artist individually, and then they're going to then speak about their processes individually. Then we're going to, hopefully then have plenty of questions then to field from what all of you came for and what you're interested in. So I'm just going to jump right in here. So I have to go in order. So we don't have any name tags, but Russel Fouts, Marcia Seltzer, Ken Turner, yeah. Marcia. You guys are supposed to be in alphabetical order soon.
Are we?
I just took the overview.
So Ken Turner, Marcia Seltzer, Russel Fouts, and Judith Motzkin are all along here. So I'm going to again go through all this, and then we'll get to the further introductions. But they're all artists whose explorations of low temperature, alternative firing, and atmospheric firing are innovative, experimental, and reflective of their own personal journeys in clay. Their work represents a broad and diverse range of experiences which they've accumulated over their professional careers, both aesthetically and technically. So these four ceramic artists will reflect on their paths into special directions of lowering their firing temperature. In each their own way, they've pursued a direction that's taken them into a unique and gratifying journey of discovery. The common instigator for starting on these paths was an early introduction to American raku, experimental kilns, and also alternative firing processes. And 40 plus years, all of these folks are still working and playing with fire in different ways. So in responding to their individual experiences and their self-imposed aesthetics or their environmental constraints, again, each person has come up with their own distinct voice in clay as well, and how they respond to fire as an integral part of their creative process. And each will detail their personal explorations in which their unique work has evolved over time. So Russel's desire to push his self-imposed limits has led to him to develop a unique practice and body of smoke-fired work using innovative resist and application techniques with only newspaper as combustibles. And Judith works with variations of time, temperature, and atmosphere, and a limited palette of combustibles and minerals nested in sagars to set the circumstances for accidents to paint landscapes of fire and smoke on the smooth clay forms. Marcia has explored alternative firing processes from raku, sagars, avar firing, soluble salts, and she focuses on the marks made using avar and how her forming processes can influence color response determined by temperature and cooling, as well as soluble salts and low temperature. And Ken's notable journey in clay has been one of experimenting and discovery. Exploring and combining surface treatments and firing techniques in a wide range of temperatures are the hallmark of his unique work, and he celebrates the gifts of flame. I think like we all think of flame as a gift and fun. So what I want to do is kind of give a brief introduction and background to them, and then we'll get into the different ones, but I will reorganize my notes since you guys have reorganized yourself.
Keep you on your toes.
So Ken has defined his career in all aspects of the clay world over the last 46 years. He's been teaching for the last 25 years and is currently the director of Plastic Arts and DigiPen Institute of Technology. Ken has lectured at a number of universities, art institutes, and potteries across China on 2 separate occasions. He has had numerous exhibitions, and his work is represented in museums and collections internationally. He's also well represented in a variety of publications. Ken credits his success in ceramics with his need to create, taking advantage of every opportunity that comes his way by looking up his ceramic heroes. Ken learned everything he could through his observations and from anyone willing to share information, techniques, and their wisdom with him. His vast knowledge was gained through hard work, never-ending research and experimentation, and accepting his failures as lessons, owning them, and moving forward. And again, Ken, he celebrates this wisdom of and gifts of flame, and that's kind of a celebratory theme through his work. And then Marcia Seltzer, she's professor emeritus from Montana State University, Billings, where she taught from 1975 to 2000. She received 2 Fulbright Senior Scholar Awards, Spain in 1985, documenting traditions among Spanish folk potters, and 1994 to Uzbekistan, researching architectural ceramics along the Silk Road and teaching studio ceramics and ceramic art history at the Tashkent Institute of the Arts. She's had residencies in Banff in Canada, Iceland, Villers, France, Creatorome Lemirianda. I'm going to mispronounce some things, so you have to bear with me. The Archie Bray Foundation and the Clay Studio of Philadelphia. She served on the board of NCECA and the Potters Council and the technical staff of Ceramics Monthly, has written for Studio Potter and Pottery Making Illustrated, Ceramics Monthly, and British Archaeology Reports, and the NCECA journals. Her work has recently appeared in the Revista Ceramica Internacional and has been included in numerous books. She's taught workshops across the US and Canada, Spain, Italy, and Scotland. Her interest in low-fire techniques began in Raku with Paul Soldner in 1968 and continued as a professor teaching teachers in Montana, where school budgets were often lacking. Her experimentations continue today, and in using the Avara technique and experimenting with soluble salts in low-fire kilns, her studio is now also in Red Lodge, Montana. And Russel Fouts. Early experience with many different approaches to working with clay and firing instilled in Russel a desire to challenge preconceived ideas about what can and can't be done to work in a very constrained limits. Pushing these limits has led him to develop a unique practice and body of smoke-fired work using innovative resist, application, and firing techniques in electric kilns. And Judith Motzkin. Judith she's a self-taught studio ceramist and mixed media artist, with a studio in an old stable next to her home in Cambridge and her gas kilns in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. Judy began her clay work in the Student Union pot shop at Cornell, where she worked while she was a student in Asian studies. She draws inspiration from travel, history, landscape, and the nature of materials and processes. Interest in work directly with fire and smoke was ignited by visits to Mexican pottery villages in the pueblos of the American Southwest. Disregard for the rules, love of the fire, and experimentation with abandon set the tone for her to develop her personal palette in atmospheric accidents. So Judith's Sagar-fired vessels are in the permanent collections of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, Crocker Art Museum, Fuller Craft Museum, and the Glazing Ceramics Museum. She's taught clay at MIT and facilitated firing workshops at a number of programs, including Harvard Ceramics and the Truro Center for the Arts at Castle Hill. Last spring, she lived in China and taught sculpture and creative practice at the Institute for Culture and Creative Industry, a graduate program at the, we practice this.
Shanghai Jiao Tong University.
Thank you. Where she also completed a commission for the new lobby of the school. And most recently, Judith received a 2019 Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Fellowship in Craft. So, want to welcome our artists. And, my name is Paul Andrew Wandless. So I'll be moderating. I was really, just briefly, because Marcia, she set all this up. So she says she set it up, got everyone together, and then she, yes, she did. And then she'd asked, so she, I was very honored that she asked me to moderate the panel. So that's sort of my inclusion with this was just, just being asked to do this, and I was, very appreciative of this. Years ago, myself and James Watkins wrote a book, Alternative Kilns and Firing Techniques, and that's how I've, I know many of you who are here see a lot of familiar faces, so have come through. So I think that, our love of fire, being outside, digging holes in the ground and getting things hot and smoky is like a shared experience that we all have. So I'm looking forward to, each artist speaking now more about their individual processes, and then we'll have an opportunity then to learn all about some of their techniques that they've each picked up over time. So who would like to go first?
Who wants to go first?
You're first.
Why am I first?
It's falling apart already.
Okay, well. Is this on? Can you hear me? All right. I have a thing here to talk about, but I first wanted to thank all the people who inspired me and informed me and helped me along the way. And I actually see that a lot of them are in this room. And thank you very much for all your help and assistance and love. Thank you. My name is Russel Fouts, and I do really bad things in my electric kiln. For many years, I've been doing a form of Sagar firing in aluminum foil Sagars that I call electric smoke firing. Lately, I've been experimenting with a form of firing I call electric Kogi firing. Yeah, you'll see examples as they come around on the slideshow here. My contact info is on one of those slides, or 2 slides actually. It goes by quick, so you might want to take a picture. And here. I first started electro-smoke firing as a method of doing smoke firing in electric kilns. However, through experimentation and working within its limits, it soon revealed its own virtues. The limits of electro-smoke firing suits my aesthetic perfectly. I find that working simply within narrow constraints, using a minimum of materials and techniques, really releases my creativity. The smoke doesn't move much in this technique, so most of the work is prepared. Most of the work is done before the firing. I use, in order to get a lot of variation, I employ various decorating techniques using TerraSigs, permeable and non-permeable resists that work against the TerraSigs and work against the smoke, and various methods of application. I use 2 TerraSigs, a white TerraSig that's basically the canvas, and it readily absorbs the smoke. And then I use a low-fire TerraSig over that as decoration, and it takes some of the smoke and resists some of the smoke. And yeah. What do I mean by permeable and non-permeable resists? Permeable resists are those that only partially seal the surface, letting the overlaid decoration penetrate more or less. I use 2 types of permeable resists. 2 types of permeable resists. Okay, better? All right. Let me know if you can't hear me, because I really can speak without this. I use 2 types of permeable resists, those that resist against further decoration and those that resist against the smoke. Permeable resists that partially block and further decoration are anything oily or greasy or waxy. I use crayons, pastels, lipstick, wax candles, liquid beeswax, anything like that, waxy. Absorbent paper, absorbent string will also work. Permeable resists that work against the smoke are anything that partially seals the surface of after bisque firing. So I use sodium silicate sponged on. When you bisque it, it creates a kind of a primitive glaze that lets things through. And I also work with some solutions of soda ash that also do basically the same thing. Non-permeable resists are those that block anything getting through, like your traditional wax resists, non-absorbent papers and tapes, non-absorbent strings, stickers, etc. Low-fire glazes and vitrified slips can also be used as non-permeable resists against the smoke. But again, bisque firing first. I'll use just about any means possible to, this is my work here, so you're in my section now. I use just about any means to apply decoration. I find that bad tools work the best. They give the best variations. Spitting sprayers, balding brushes, decrepit sponges, ragged bits of cloth, loose bits of strings make the best and most interesting marks. Each of these materials and tools brings its own qualities of line, texture, and permeability to the work. Pieces are bisque fired to harden the decoration and to make it resistant to the smoke. The work can be decorated and bisque fired several times, building up the surface, always finishing with a bisque firing. For the electro-smoke firing itself, each piece is double wrapped tightly in aluminum foil Sagar with about 1/4 inch of newspaper. The size and shape of the paper depends on the size and shape of the piece. The amount of smoke I want on the piece. The more paper, the more smoke. Too much paper may cause too much smoke, and that your vent won't be able to remove. The vented kiln is fired to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, 260 degrees centigrade, and then kept at that level for a period of time. I'm only interested in burning the paper, and that burns at 551 or 225 centigrade. The maturing temperature of the body isn't important, as long as it's open enough to take some smoke. How long depends on how much smoke I want. The more time, the more smoke. Although it's easy to get really nice blacks with this method by loading up the Sagar with a lot of paper, that might create too much smoke in your kiln. I find that less paper is more, less smoke is more. The Sagar concentrates the smoke, so you don't really need that much paper. The TerraSigs and the sodium solutions also have got much thinner over time, and I find that they open up the surface and bring greater, finer variations of application and allowing happy accidents to occur. The new method, which is exciting, I should have had this double printed single-sided. So I've recently started experimenting with a method I call electro-Kogi firing. A few years ago, I visited a potter in France who was doing wonderful work with firing earthenware buried in the embers of his wood kiln. He called this method Kogi after the Japanese firing technique. It got me to thinking, charcoal makes embers. What about firing my pots buried in charcoal? So I took some pots, I built a brick Sagar in my electric kiln, threw the pots in, covered them with charcoal, wood charcoal, not the Kingston stuff, and covered the Sagar with a kiln shelf. And I fired them to a 03 on a slow program. The results were really encouraging. The white SIG over the overfired earthenware body provides a reactive surface where the areas where the SIG is eaten away, absorbed into the body, and areas where it remained. All these areas took the smoke differently, which is really interesting. I also found that I could get different results depending on where I placed them in the kiln. In the bottom, nestled in the ash, created a more rustic-looking surface, dry with browns and grays, earthy red flashes, and a flesh-like surface. Higher up among the charcoal, provided a more refined surface, blacks and grays with a lovely sheen. And then refired in oxidation creates a surface with a very slight sheen and reds and earthy grays. Also, it's functional smoke-fired work. So since the clay is fired so high, it's really at its vitrification point. It's very dense. So it's impermeable to liquids. There's no absorption, and it's perfectly suitable for drinking out of. These are sake cups, espresso, things like that. So I'm really excited by this new direction. I'm looking forward to investigating it further. And thank you very much for listening.
That's me next. I'm alphabetically speaking. Can you hear me? No? Okay, I'll try better. Okay, hi, I'm Judy Motzkin. It's nice to be here. Thank you for including me in this. I'm going to talk, I think there's going to be a lot of questions. There's a lot of technical stuff, so let's get on with this. Let's ignite this fire, okay? So on my work, there's no glaze on my work. I'm just going to go over the basics here. There's no glaze on the pieces. All the color comes from the fire. It comes from the burning of materials that are fuming against the porous surface of the piece. The piece is porous in order to absorb the smoke. So it's bisque-fired, it's terrasiged, and then bisque-fired with to a very low temperature so that it maintains the sheen, which will disappear at cone 06, but is still there up to cone 08, and also absorb the materials in a kind of a, while they're moving, absorb the fumes while they're moving around. Each piece is nested in sawdust and straw that I've soaked in different minerals. So I take salt marsh hay and different kinds of straws. I mix copper, cobalt, or salt into a solution. I soak the materials, then I dry them out. The pieces are then wrapped with them, sometimes wrapped with pieces of copper, and then settled into sagars. My sagars, for round pieces, my sagars are thrown. Each piece requires 1 or 2 sagars. I stack them up into bundles, and then I put the bundles, I tumble stack the bundles in the kiln. You'll see in some of the pictures that I use a front-loading kiln, and in some of the kiln, my favorite kiln to use is an old electric kiln that's been retrofitted with propane torches, propane burners, because the top-loading kiln acts as a sagar in itself. So my sagars get tumble stacked into this kiln, which then gets more materials thrown into it so that I have no clue what's going to happen, which is how I like it. For irregular forms, unlike some of these other folks who use foil, I like to use a thin slab of clay. I call it uncroute, like the cooking method where you wrap a chicken in pastry and then you open it later, and then I crack them open and the piece comes out. So that's how I deal with irregular shapes. What else? I like to use a very limited number of materials in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways I do that is that I play with variations in the firing itself, the variations being time, temperature, and atmosphere. It's a gas-fired kiln. I can make it oxidize or reduce as much as I like, and I vary the temperature within a particular range, and also sometimes the time makes a difference. So a shorter firing is different from a longer firing, and that way I get a variety of different things to happen. So when I load it, when I set the Sagars, I have the Sagars fit the pieces in ways that might create a horizon line, because I like skies and I like those horizon lines and mountains that happen on the pieces, especially with round pieces. They act as a very simple canvas. A white terraced piece is a very simple canvas, and nothing competes with it. Whereas more irregular pieces, I tend to not create those lines because I think it's competition. So over time, I've learned to read the fire. I listen, like the color of fire is important to me, and the sound of the flame. It's like firing in a kiln is a little like playing an instrument for me. It is an instrument for me. I started to do this, so over time I've developed and created and kind of gathered a palette of accidents, and that's what I paint with. So I started doing this about 10 years into my clay career. I'd been doing high fire porcelain and stoneware. Then I visited Mexico and came back excited about that kind of soft carbon surface. It spoke to me, that softness, and also the simplicity of the lifestyle that goes around the kind of, well, it's elemental. The simplicity and the processes and the materials have a kind of integrity that spoke to me. So I went home and I started making fires, putting pots in them, and then I added stuff. And I was working in a studio that had an indoor oil-fired salt kiln. So I took half of that kiln and turned it into a pit, and then started adding things to that, and one day I got this heart-stopping flash of red, copper red, on an otherwise black surface. I still have that piece. And yeah, because that was it. That was like, oh my gosh, can I do that? And so then I opened up the firebox and I turned on the oil to see if I could get a little more heat in the kiln. And it's been, so that was a long time ago. And I've been playing with that ever since. And that was a little nuts, but over the years I've built lots of kilns. I've tried everything twice. I've been inspired by other people's risk-taking behavior, and I come by it naturally, I think, and developed this body of work. The other thing that you'll see in my work is what I do when things break, because this stuff is fragile and things break. And so over the course of time, I've had lots of shards, and so I hammer up my shards and I tumble them in sand and water like the ocean does, and I use them in composite assemblaged pieces with clay pieces, and often in wooden boxes, sometimes not, and so I think people are going to have a lot of questions, so I'm going to stop there, and thank you all for coming, and I'm delighted to be here. So onward.
Okay, I guess I'm next, and can you all hear me? Yeah? How about up there? Okay. All right. I'm Marcia Saucer, and I wanted to say that I'm really excited to be here with a bunch of smoke addicts. So and a pot fondler, anonymous.
It's my organization.
Yeah. So I think we've all been seduced by the gifts of the fire, and we've all come to our own journey with it. I'd like to start with the Ovara technique. I saw some Ovara pots by Jayne German online on Facebook, and I became very good friends with her. And I really love her work, and it just kind of made me want to investigate it farther. And I noticed that her pieces reacted differently by the thickness of the work. So that's where I started making the crackle pots for the Ovara firing, and you'll see those come up. And it's kind of a raku process, but instead of post-firing in smoke, you post-fire in a solution of flour and yeast, and it smells like burnt toast when you're working with it.
Nice.
And my other process that I've been working with lately is soluble salts, and those I was using originally for foil Sagar, and then I started putting them in Sagars, and then I had one break and I got some beautiful colors, so I just said, who needs a Sagar? You know, so I just started doing them right on the kiln shelf, and actually I raised them up so they weren't distributing the salts right into my kiln shelf, so that saved the kiln shelves. I know soluble salts are very toxic, and I only mix 6 to 12 grams at a time. And I apply it with cotton balls onto the pot, and we all use terra sage as our base surface. And then I put salts on it with a salt shaker, and I squirt it with water so the crystals stick. And I let it soak overnight so the salts dissolve into the base color. So that's how that's done. And then I've been experimenting with different salts, and the most recent one is manganese chloride ice melter that I was using on my gutters at my Red Lodge, Montana house, trying to melt the gutter ice jam. And that is a much chunkier source of manganese chloride than Epsom salts, which is, used in the bathtub. So anyway, that's what I've been doing lately. And after 50 years, I just want to say that I'm still seduced by the gifts of the fire. And it's great to be here with these other people. They are my role models, and I've learned a lot from them. So thank you.
Well, I guess I'm up. Can you hear me up there? I'm sorry, my voice is a bit rough, so if you don't understand me, I'm terribly sorry. I can't change that. Hopefully one day. Anyway, thank you, Paul, for agreeing to moderate. It's really nice to meet you. Marcy, thank you for inviting me, and I've made some great friends. And Sika is a really wonderful venue where we can go and come here and learn things and share with one another. So I'm really happy to be here. And I kind of think that's what my life has been about, I started at the age of 16 making pots. And I had a wonderful mentor. Regno Reinholsten was my first teacher and great friend and mentor for the rest of his life. And he was always giving and sharing and exposing me to opportunities, and I'm ever thankful for, and I feel I owe that to everyone else that ever asked me for anything. So my Facebook number is, no, I just, sorry. Yeah, as I said, I started at 16, and at that time, that was back in the 70s, and it was all about cone tin reduction. So that's where I was at. All I wanted to do was make pots and sell pots and be able to make more. So eventually I was having shows, and I was really excited about my work, and I thought, okay, here's a new show. I'm gonna completely change my work. It's all gonna be black and white, really very dramatic stuff. So I had 3 kiln loads and a pretty large kiln of work ready to go for this show in 2 weeks. My first firing, I was all excited to open it up, and I could just feel myself flushing as I'm unbricking this thing, seeing nothing, just like a kiln usually sings to you. There was nothing. It was dead. And I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And it just dawned on me. And I feel like this was Bob Sperry tapping me on the shoulder, said, hey, remember that workshop back in '76 that you took? I taught you how to do lusters. Well, I had a 2-gram vial of luster and a brush, and so I pulled pieces out and I just put bands on everything and loaded it up, fired it. The next morning, opened it up, and wah, it was like, oh my God, I found something new, something exciting, something bright and brilliant. And the work just shined, and I sold really well. So that was like a new journey for me. I got into lusters, and just more and more gold and more platinum and more copper. I was just draping everything. And I had a really exciting experience back in high school with raku, but that was low fire, and everybody was doing high fire. So I just kind of, put that in the background. Then I took a raku workshop from a friend of mine, John Harris, and it just kind of reignited that passion for working with, with the hot work, pulling it out of the kiln and playing with it, and the smoke and all that, all that great stuff that we experience. So just, I went back and I said, John, that was a really cool kiln. I'd really like to come down and take some measurements and build my own. And so he allowed me to come down, take measurements, and it's a beautiful clamshell design, which I think Clay Art Center in Tacoma now produces. And it's a wonderful kiln. I love it. I started doing more and more raku work while maintaining my functional work and decorative work. But I also started teaching at that time. And students would say, look, this article in Ceramic Monthly or PMI, and there was an article on foil sagger. I'd never heard of it, but the work was beautiful. Paul Antone wrote an article in the PMI, and I said, well, yeah, let's try it. So I went home, I got some stuff, and I don't want to just present to my students. I didn't know what I was doing. I went home and fired up my kiln, and I got some amazing results right away. I thought, well, this is great. And so I started sharing that with my students, and we had some pretty successful firings. Not everyone's as successful, but that's kind of the way it goes. And you learn from that. Then I got a call, and I was asked to give a workshop through the Potters Council, and they wanted me to do pit fire workshops. Okay, yeah, I can do pit, sure. I hadn't done much. So I'm figuring out the pit fire, and went to the workshop. It was a great workshop, lots of wonderful people doing different techniques, and Joe Brecca was doing more foil sagger. And he kind of turned me on to a little bit more information, and it just kind of blew up from there. Potters Council called me and asked me to do another workshop, actually here at Medina, or Adina? Is it Adina? In Medina. In Medina. So they said, well, foil sagger. And I thought, well, okay, I've done a little. And so I just threw myself into it and did lots of experimentation with different chemicals that I had never played with. And all of a sudden I was developing colors that I'd never seen. And it was so exciting for me. So it was really wonderful to come and share that. I'm kind of all over the place. I've now finally decided that I'm in a good place. I'm teaching full-time, not getting as much work of my own done as I'd like to, but I'm able to really try anything and everything I want to do. I have my own studio with all the firing. I can do pit fire there, I can do raku, I can do it cone 10, I can do everything, whether it's in a reduction kiln or an electric kiln. So I like to play around. And some of my newest work is some of my most exciting. Unfortunately, I don't have any photographs of that because it just came about. Through the passing of a really good friend who was a painter and decided he wanted to work with clay. And he came in the studio, and within 2 years, he's like making every mistake, everything you're told not to do, he's doing it and coming out with really wonderful pieces. So there's something really special about someone who's talented in art, but not necessarily in your discipline. So they'll go in and they just do things. And he was super courageous. So he inspired me to take that step. And I don't want to keep going because we can all talk forever about our work. So I'd really like to open this up to questions and hand this off to Paul. But I do want to say thank you to all the giants and my heroes. I'm wearing some of my heroes today. I've got new heroes. I want to have them sign my shirt. I want to take it off at some point, though.
Well,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So yes, at this point, does anyone have any questions or comments for any of the artists? Yes?
Is this information available online somewhere? Because that was going extremely fast.
We are going to try to. Russell's our tech guy.
Yeah, well, as far as,
get it
like,
up
as far as general,
I don't know. I was going to try and make at least my part of the presentation available online. I didn't know whether my friends wanted to do that as well, but I could try and see what I can do. Well, you have my contact information on there, so if you're interested, then send me an email, and I'll keep track of it and let you know when we have something.
I think we can all distribute our own portion if you're interested. Hopefully we can get it together. That would be really nice to be able to make it available.
yeah, there's some general information sometimes that's in the program afterwards, the journal. But a lot of us as individual artists also have their own sites that you can go to with additional information. But as far as the emails that's in the information, it's always welcome to just get a hold of us for more details.
Somebody wrote a very good book.
And there are books on the subject as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for the plug there. Yeah. But this is an opportunity to ask any specific questions now, if anyone had. Yes?
I can answer first, I guess. I use a white terracig, which is it's a high fire ball clay, and I don't color it at all. And the red terracig is made from my clay body, so it's not colored at all other than the color of the clay body. I like to keep things really super simple.
On my website, I have a quick way to make terracig that I learned in Italy, and it's a high fire ball clay. So that's what I use.
Me too.
Yeah. I actually, the first time I did terracig, I used Vince Patelka's recipe.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. I got to say, it was one of the best terraciges I've used.
Vince is
1-2 hours, is it?
It's very specific. But this last summer, I played with all kinds of adding colorant to terracig, but I still really prefer the white background and the atmospheric qualities that
Vince
can be.
Vince Patelka and Pete Pinnell have written a lot of really good things about terracig, how to make it and stuff like that. Maybe just to clarify about the white terracig, it turns out we all use a high fire ball clay.
Yeah.
It's for absorption. If you use a lower fire terracig, or
gonna
one
resist
that
more.
matures at a lower temperature, it will seal against the smoke better. But like for my purposes, I want that openness underneath and then I use the red TerraSig to resist against that smoke.
Like the process that you use for that
this
cup is
it's
food safe?
completely it's completely impermeable. Sorry?
What temperature?
03. It's an earthenware body, and the actual temperature is probably I don't know. I was doing my Elica with it at 1040 centigrade. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. And these are now being fired to 1100 centigrade. So that's about cone 3. And that's really about the limit for this body. It's a nice body. I'm sorry you can't get it because I live in Belgium, and it's a flower pot clay from a flower pot company, and what they don't make flower pots out of, they sell to schools. And it's a really nice body. You can take it up really high and it doesn't bloat. So that's what you want to look for, actually. If you're looking for here, test bodies, test earthenware bodies, and find something that doesn't bloat. You're welcome.
Okay, you mix the recipe up. The recipe's on my website. It's about half a 5-gallon bucket of water and 2 pounds of flour. This is not, it's on my website, so if it's not correct. And then you let it, you put sugar and yeast in there, let it ferment for 3 days, keep it warm, stir it up, and it should be foamy by the time you're ready to use it. And so you fire the pots up to 1650 and pull them out one at a time like raku, and you dip them in the fermented brew, and then you dip them into water, and then you're done. And it's a really great process, I think, for inner city schools because there's no smoke. It's just steam. So, and it smells like burnt toast. So,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Why the yeast?
Because if you've ever made bread, you know that sugar and yeast activate the flour.
Okay.
Okay, somehow.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yes? You can dip it in different ways. If you want, like if you look up Jose Ramos on Facebook, he dips his in several times and he gets different layers of like a pattern result. If you use a smooth body, you can get what they call the eyes. In fact, this guy with the orange shirt right next to you over here, Chad.
There, that guy.
He does Ovara up in smoke, his name of his pottery, and I met him through the Ovara page. But anyway, you can dip it pretty fast, and then you just in the water. It's like raku, but it's faster, actually. So.
Yeah, the blue?
How stable is the surface?
On Ovara, it's pretty so. If you put it in the brew after it gets down to 1500, it's slimy and it'll come off. But if you get it in at 1650, it'll stay on there, and it's burnt into the surface. I put a wax sealer on them, and so far they're pretty stable. I think it's pretty amazing how the salt disperses into the clay. So that's why I let them sit for overnight.
Over there.
From what I understand, Janet Chassier did a good article on it in Arts Technical, or Ceramics Technical, a couple years ago. And it is originally Eastern European, and they call it Baltic raku. And it's mostly in the Ukraine and Belarus, I think. Is that right, Chad? Do you think? This is for me?
I guess it's this
Okay.
for Marcy?
Or,
Oh, yeah.
I don't wax, so it's not for me.
I wax, you wax.
I do. I wax my pots. You can use butcher's wax or any kind of. My favorite wax to use is Dorland's Wax Medium. It's a clear, smooth, unsmelly, thin, microcrystalline painter's wax. And then I buff it after. A little bit, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so any kind of wax really is gonna work well. A floor polish, anything like that. It just depends on the kind of sheen. Like the piece up there that you see, it's got a nice, very satiny look. If you want a high gloss, You can use bowling alley wax, or I use spray acrylic finish as well.
I was wrong, actually. I don't wax, but on the aluminum foil smoke Sagar stuff, sometimes I will use teak oil. Not teak oil varnish, but teak oil. And it's absorbed a bit by the clay body, and I find that it can enhance the color and the contrast of the different colors on the piece. But you sort of have to be careful. You have to decide when to use it and not when to use it, because sometimes it will just ruin a piece. So it's.
And I also don't wax everything. Sometimes I get little flashes of metallic copper, and waxing it will ruin them. Completely ruins them, takes it away.
Yeah.
And so if a pot comes out that perfect and then everything else is great, I just leave it be, you know.
That's really when.
And I like the softness too.
For the-
When it's going out in the world, it's nice to have wax on it, just to protect it from other people.
For the
She's had her
that's
hand up.
really the key thing right there is if the variations are very subtle, don't touch it. Just leave it like that. Even leave the surface open, or maybe a wax that isn't absorbed or something like that. But any absorption is going to change the way that the surface looks.
When you say you're putting them in your grill, is that like next to your hamburgers? And, I mean, okay. So a lot of these soluble salts need to they don't volatilize until about 1400 degrees. You know, you can get some certainly at earlier temperatures, but I can't imagine your grill is much more than.
Oh, I've been getting some really beautiful.
Well, sure, you could try some linseed oil.
You mean as a solvent?
Yes. So just
Water
something
is
that
really the
application.
solvent for soluble salts
Yeah.
mostly.
And maybe that's what the difference is that you're making, is that you said various materials. So like what they're using are soluble materials. They're soluble salts. But if you're putting like cobalt oxide or something on there, that's
Yeah.
not going to react the same way because
No.
it's not soluble. See? And it won't be absorbed by the body. Some it could be, yes.
But its fumes could be absorbed. The fumes
That's
of it
true,
can be
yeah.
absorbed.
I've been getting.
Well, that's some of the differences with that are some things that you put in, they fume, and that's what some of the Sagars
Yes.
are. You create this,
Yes.
it has its own personal environment in there, so when the materials start to fume, then they attach to the surface differently. So depending on the different melting points of the different materials you put in there, some have more of an opportunity to stick, and some just don't get hot enough to stick or fume or impregnate the surface. So some of it so what you want to do is just test and experiment.
Yeah.
And some things work
Keep
at some
experimenting.
temperatures, and some things just don't work at others. So you're working with a real limited firing range in there. So the successful results you get, they will continue to work. And the ones that aren't working, those are the ones that you're probably going to have to go a little bit higher to get them to be more active on the surface, or really to infuse the atmosphere a bit more so they can impregnate. For local reduction?
I think you're talking about where I had it on a bed of sand.
Yes.
Yeah, and I put the,
You put the feathers down.
yeah, I like that because if you drop the feathers on there, it gets more smoke and you don't get a good, just plain old imprint of it. And what I use, Michael's has great bags of feathers. But I'll tell you, I lived in South Texas and I had muscovy ducks in my yard, and whenever they got into breeding season, I had feathers all over my backyard. And they had oil. The duck's feathers have oil in them, so they have a really good imprint as well. Well, I usually roll my pots on that.
yeah.
I use rounded forms. I just roll it on the horsehair or the feathers, and it's a fast, I don't let it sit on there, I just roll it over it. Yeah, I fire to 1100 for horsehair and feathers. Yeah.
And that's a
'Cause
tricky.
it's much lower.
Yeah, and that's a tricky process too, because it has a short window for that to happen. So sometimes once the work drops just like 50 to 100 degrees, it's too cool to sometimes create these effects. And especially with something like local reduction like that, where the pot's hot enough to whatever you're putting on there, whether it's horsehair or feathers or sugar, I mean, you have a small window for it to make that kind of carbon footprint on there. So I found just in my experiences with doing that sometimes is I just don't overload the kiln. You know, I only maybe have 2 or 3 pieces and take them out. Sometimes your pieces that you're taking out later are the ones that aren't working as well because they're starting to cool too. So sometimes it's how much work are you firing, how are you pulling it out, and making sure you're keeping in a tight window so the work is as hot as it can be so you are able to, combust the material as strongly as you can.
So you're referring to the luster that I'm putting on these atmospheric pieces? Yeah, I just I can fire them right along with the Sagars. Yeah, you can just brush it right on, or I've put string on there and drawn string across hair. No, just terracige. Yeah, and in fact, the reason I did the luster was because I had this vision of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't getting there, and I wanted to glaze the top of the piece with the crawling glaze, and then I wanted the bottom to be atmospheric. Well, I've glazed the top of the piece, but some of the residue of the glaze would run down and leave a little band, and I didn't like that belly band, so I just covered it with luster. That piece actually was, separate luster fire, but you can put the luster right in with the Sagar stuff. The colored blushes are underglazes underneath. Controlling the size of the crawling, and I do masking. I also do a thinner application of glaze and double it up, or double dip or pour. So the thicker the glaze, the larger the crackle. It's difficult to do them on round surfaces with the glazes that I'm using because they tend to want to fall off. I mean, I've seen some really wonderful pieces. If it's thin enough, you can get a beautiful crackle all the way over. But to try to get the effect that I'm after, I get a lot of stuff that'll peel off, and those pieces end up going through a series of multiple firings to try to save them, or I just end up smashing them.
Questions? Just thanks again for the panel.